We're now moving on to session 6. This is our final session of the public part of the conference. What's next? Projections for U.S.-China relations in 2026. This is a unique format that we've done over the years. We did this format at the APEC CEO Summit here in San Francisco in 2023. It's one long continuous conversation, and you're going to hear from 4 experts. Each conversation is 15 minutes, and it's a rolling conversation. So the first speaker will interview the second speaker will interview the third speaker, and so on. There will be a chime. When there is a chime, that means that there is 1 minute remaining. So we are going to go ahead and start momentarily. We're going to start with Jeannette Chu, Vice President of National Security Policy at the National Foreign Trade Council, and she is going to be paired with Max Baucus, who's the former U.S. Ambassador to China and U.S. Senator from Montana. Then the ambassador is going to be paired with Chen Dongxiao, who is president of the Shanghai Institutes for International Studies. He's traveled in specifically from Shanghai for this program. Professor Chen will be paired with Yan Luo, who is a partner at Covington and Burling. And then we are going to close out with Yan Luo asking questions back to Jeannette. So if we're ready to start, take it away, Jeannette.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And thanks to the Asia Society for hosting this, for reprising this format, and to everyone here today. We're meant to look ahead, to do a little bit of prognostication into what the future might hold for U.S.-China relations. And this day I've really been struck by how today has focused on reframing the U.S.-China relationship in many ways, from a new world order to challenging assumptions about what does supremacy really mean, what does success mean, what does competition look like, and there's nobody better to start us off for the last word than Ambassador Baucus. And sir, I'd really be very curious to hear your views on the trajectory of U.S.-China relations since you have served as ambassador. Are you more or less optimistic now? And if you are or are not, then in what specific areas?
Yeah. Oh, I'm very worried. I think we're being challenged more than we've ever been, at least in our memory, since maybe Second World War. I could sense it when I was serving over there. Chinese, I've been in China many times in advance. Chinese work so hard, they're so industrious, almost a survivalist instinct in their DNA, want to make money, take care of the family, really, really work hard. Combined with 1,000 years of history in China, very proud. When I was over there, I found that our staff was terrific, embassy staff, very smart. And by the way, it's great to see many of you who worked at the embassy before I arrived. But there was significant exceptionalism, arrogance among the staff. I had to work hard to say, no, 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 we're no better than the Chinese. It's in your voice, it's in it's in your phrasing. You think you're a little more superior when you talk to the Chinese, but not at all. I worked very hard to address that. When I developed a reputation, I think, speaking candidly with my counterparts. You know, sitting across the table from a minister, he'd have his talking points and read from them, and my crack staff would read my talking points and read them. And after several months, I realized, this is nuts, this is stupid. We're wasting our time here. So I would just interrupt mid-sentence. Could you explain that, please? I'll give an example. Try to be totally constructive, not obsequious, not condescending, but just constructive and try to find a solution here. And I trained my staff best I could to do that, as well as all other secretaries who came over. Be candid, be constructive, as well as CEOs, newer CEOs, not the older ones. But I also found, frankly, that there was no strategic plan. U.S. did not have any strategy, long-term strategy with respect to China. I'd be on the NSC middle of the night phone calls with D.C. and holy mackerel, this is all tactical. This is all ad hoc. There is no long-term strategy with China. It was stunning from my perspective. Going forward now, today, back there we had lots of meetings. I could see anybody I wanted to see in the government. secretaries came over, SNED, Philadelphia Orchestra came over, lots of people exchanges, you name it. There was a lot of exchanges. The assumption then, as you know, was, well, they'll be more like us if we have all these interchanges. That was wrong. Wrong because we're so ignorant as Americans about China. The U.S. government is ignorant about China. Very few speak Chinese. Very few have been to China. They don't spend time in China. They don't understand China. They're Atlanticists. They look across the Atlantic, Europeans. They're not Chinese Asians who really understand and know China. That's one of the reasons, I think. So my view in all this is that as I said, we're extremely challenged. The challenge is that we're semi-asleep in America still. It's the politics in America, which is making things worse. In my state of Montana, last race, $300 million spent, the incumbent, opponent, all in. 2/3 of the ads were my opponent's too soft on China. That is typical across America. It's good politics for senators and congressmen to criticize China. Second, some just are ignorant because they haven't been over here. And third, that maybe they're just ignorant. So what do we do about this? I think most of this room agree about the problem. That is, that China's getting a little stronger, not only a little bit stronger, it maybe has a slight advantage. All the production we talked about, solar, wind turbines, EVs, batteries, and I saw what 1.3 trillion has been spent by the Belt and Road Initiative already around the world. That's 10 times, but last year, 10 times what the U.S. is spending in foreign development aid and so forth. So we got a problem, and what's the solution? As I listen to everybody here, everybody tends to agree. What do we do about it? Or we try to analyze where we're going to be 10 years from now? Who knows? To me, that's somewhat irrelevant. The question is, where do we want to be 10 years from now, and what are we doing about it? It's members of Congress, House and Senate, what do they care about? Re-election. They care most about re-election. They care about policy, but I'll be honest with you, re-election is probably up there a little more than policy, generally. They like the job, it's good, they want to do the right thing, and so on and so forth. And so the problem here is Democrats are weak because they don't have committee chairmanships in the House and the Senate. Republicans are scared to death, those that are good thinking, are thinking properly. They're afraid of Trump. And my view is that there are a lot of things we need to do to avoid what may be necessary, and that's a crisis. We may need a Sputnik, we may need a Pearl Harbor, and maybe some real crisis to force American people to start working together. Get rid of a lot of this political polarization that exists in our country, and forcing members of Congress to finally to work a little better together. As you know, we all know, polarization is worse over time. It's terrible today, and Trump's made it worse, much worse than it was when I was there, and even when I was there. So we have to have more exchanges, more people go, if we can, get more people go to China. My view is when I was over there, I thought if I could only load up a stretch 747 and fill it full of members of Congress and get them over to China, a month, all around China, just see what's going on. Not just check the box meetings, but talk to people. Go out to Xinjiang province, go up to Heilongjiang, all around the country. And but of course that's fanciful. It's not going to happen. But I do urge all of us to think much more about what in the world we're going to do about it. Not just talk about it. Not just analyze. Not just try to predict. Do something. Do something. And I leave that to all of you in the room, is what you think you can do, either locally or organizations you belong to, or whatever way, and I'll finish with this point. About a month I was over there, this was about 2015. Yang Jiechu sat me down. He says, Ambassador, our system is superior to yours. Our system of socialism with Chinese characters, it's superior to your democracy. We're the role model for developing countries. They're going to see that we're superior. Why are we superior? 2 reasons, he said. One is, look how far we've come in 40 years. Never would have happened if we were a democracy. It never would have happened. He's right. It never would have happened if China was a democracy. Americans don't understand the authoritarian form of government. We don't like it because we're a democracy, but it is what it is. We have to deal with it because that's what it is. Second, he said we're superior because we peer review all our leaders. They work themselves up through the party secretary, Zhejiang, or wherever it might be. And we know who's really good, get to the top. Your country, anybody can be president. So I want to turn that around. He criticized us and said they're superior, we're inferior because we're a democracy. I want to turn that around. We've got to show that we could make ourselves better and stronger because we are a democracy. That only happens because we, the people, are really in charge. We are the people in charge. They work for us. Members of the House and Senate work for all of us. We are the employers. They're the hired hands. They're the employees. They work for us. We forget it. We totally forget it. Now, everybody in this room is going to think, well, gee, I try to do something, it's not going to work. You got to try. I think a lot of things you can do if you really want to make a difference.
Thank you. That's also a very inspiring perspective that you're offering. You know, trade has always been one of the bedrocks of this relationship.
What is, sorry?
Trade has been a bedrock. And I would say until fairly recently, it was one of the things that we could rely on, right? That our economies were so tied together. However, the tensions that we've talked about all along now over strategic competition, technology, have really undermined this aspect of the U.S. China relationship.
Right.
Do you believe that it's possible to introduce a counterweight to that? And if there were to be an effective counterweight, what's your suggestion for that? What is a good counterweight?
Well, it's been discussed today, and I think it's somewhat accurate. And that's under the Biden administration. We did pass significant legislation. The CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, infrastructure, to get our own house in order. We are stronger. We can project power more efficiently worldwide, more political power, the more we are strong at home. Those were 3 good pieces of legislation. Second, I worked to build ties with our allies. Trump didn't. And it's, with Austria, all our allies. That makes a difference, makes a big difference. Then Trump came in, no allies, he might be attacking our allies with tariffs and what he says about Canada and Europe and even Australia. I mean, the guy's amazing. How we're shooting ourselves in the foot with the actions we're taking. So the counterweight to me is to, as I said, pass legislation that really makes us strong. It could be CHIPS, whatever it is. National security issues mentioned in an earlier panel. It's not tariff our allies, but work with our allies, because we're in this together. And the more we work together, the more likely we can build push back against what's happening.
I'm really pleased to hear you talk so much about the role of Congress. Right now, there's literally more than a dozen bills, right? And the one bipartisan, bicameral issue is how much can we hate on China?
Right.
All of these bills address that. Based on your own experience, right, what advice would you give your colleagues today as they start drafting legislation? What is the seminal takeaway that you want them to have?
Well, I do think it's important to understand China. We don't. In my confirmation hearing, then Senator Marco Rubio walked up to me, we chatted. He says, well, Max, I'm going over to Asia. Where are you going, Marco? Oh, I'm going to Japan. I'm going to South Korea. Are you going to China? Oh, no, I'm not going to China. I'm afraid of China. He's never been to China, Marco Rubio. Think about Gallagher, who was chairman of that Select House Committee. He's never been to China. How in the world do you criticize a country if you've never been there? Cabinet, I won't mention who they are, but cabinet secretaries or assistant secretaries call me up, Max, what do I do? I'm come over. Never been there before. These are household names. That's a problem. It's a real problem. And it's just, so part of the answer to those members of the House and the Senate is that. And they're playing a good short-term game. It's a losing long-term game. Because the more they do that, and they know it, deep down, that's long-term, that's not the right thing to do, but they care more about the short-term, re-election, getting re-elected, and they'll let other things, let other pieces fall in place.
Thank you. So I know that you and your wife have formed a China Study Abroad program under the auspices of the Baucus Institute, and you're very passionate about building this future, right? If you had no limits, and you think about things like the brain drain that we talked about this morning of Chinese-American scientists and technologists and the engineers that Dan Wan just said that we needed so desperately, right? What can we do to strengthen these people-to-people ties and turn the tide on the brain drain?
Yeah, well, thank you. Mel and I are pretty proud of what we're doing. Frankly, we set up a public policy institute. It's done a think tank. Was to get Montana college-age and graduate-age students out of their comfort zone. How do we do that? We place them in different positions, internships all around the world. Climate scholars, a good number of DC work in Senate offices, totally nonpartisan. They come back on fire. They're so inspired. And some run for office. They're so excited about what they see working in Washington, DC, believe it or not. We sent a bunch to China. We sent 2 groups of 20 to China last year. We're going to send 3 groups of 20 to China this year. Mel and I go with a couple of the groups, take them all around the country. They work at different universities in China. So we're doing that. If I could wave a magic wand, oh gosh, it would be, this is corny. Channel Ted Lasso.
Okay.
Channel Ted Lasso. That is, be non-judgmental. Non-judgmental. Be curious. Ask questions about everything. In this case, go to China. I would love to see a major U.S. program about Americans, especially American students, going to China. Last night at dinner, it was Jim McGregor, a great idea. I agree with it, many do. We should have a national service program in America. Peace Corps, military, or whatever it is. Everybody has to work together as Americans, as kids, for a couple of years. If we had something like that, that's American. But something similar in the same scope, my wildest dream is a kind of exchange program, Chinese students, U.S. students, because they are, after all, it's corny, they are our future. Our standard of living depends upon how well we manage this relationship, and much of it's our children.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay.
Micro pressure.
I start?
Yes, your
Okay. Well, good to see you, Professor. We got to know each other last night at the ping pong interchange quite a bit. That good chat together, you and I. I really appreciated your insights and as we talked about this relationship. And the basic question I have goes, give us some insight as to how China is going to deal with this perceived, I think, realistic and actual development where China is pretty strong, has the opportunity to either, take advantage of economic dominance and kind of make America subservient, or on the other hand, work with America and saying, hey, you're a country, we're a country, and so forth. So can you tell me a little about the debate that may or may not be going on in China and how China will handle that question? Again, my assumption is that China is in a potentially superior position vis-a-vis the United States. I think it began in Anchorage with Tony Blinken and Yonggi, that interchange. When I saw that interchange in Anchorage a couple of years ago, I thought, holy mackerel. China's realizing they can stand toe-to-toe with the United States. And it's becoming even more confident since then. Korea is an example, slapping reciprocal tariffs on the U.S. when the U.S. put 145% tariffs on China. Other countries buckled, China didn't. China stood up, said, we're not going to take this. Rare earths, another example. So, assuming China thinks it's in a bit of going to be in a superior economic position compared with the United States, how will China deal with that? Well, apart, I say, many Americans think China wants to dominate the United States. They're afraid of, for political reasons. China wants to dominate. China wants to be the real hegemon. Many Americans think that. So the real question is, what's China going to do about all of this?
Well, it's yeah. I think that maybe this is one of the key misperception of Americans about Chinese or China. When you say that when China's growing up and China's going to dominate the world or want to take advantage of the United States, I think that at least this is what I believe one of the key misperceptions. The explanation about those misperceptions, I think at least two folds. One is, if I'm wrong, please correct me. I think that perhaps, ever since the end of World War II, the United States has enjoyed its superpower or hegemon. So U.S. has enjoyed its superpower status for more than 80 years. Even during those Cold War era when former Soviet Union is almost appear competing with the United States during that period. But I think, when the Cold War ended, I think most of American people, in particular those elites, believe that it is the United States defeat the Soviet Union. So you won the Cold War. So I think that maybe among many American, particularly those elites, there's no experience of how to live with a real peer with the different culture, tradition, political system in a peaceful and mutual respective way. So this is what I understand, that what is the root cause of this perception or misperception that when China is growing up, China will be the same as a Soviet Union. The second reason, my understanding is that perhaps it's also related to a kind of self-mirrored image about yourself, about the United States itself. This is what I understand, that since quite a number of our American colleagues believe in the strength, the power, as the latest senior officials of the Trump administration said that those so-called international law is just nothing. All right, it is the power, it is the strength will decide and who will be on the table or who will be on the menu, something like that. So I think that in a self-mirrored image, it's relatively natural for American colleagues to perceive the rising China will behave itself as the same way as the United States does. So I think that maybe these are the two, what I believe, the two root causes for this perception or misperception. So, but at the same time, of course, so how to deal? You said that.
How's China going to deal with that?
How can China do that?
I might say.
I think that you have already offered some solutions in the past panel discussion. You said that there should be a more in-person exchange. From Chinese side, we should have more Americans coming to China to see what is happening there. If you talk in person with those Chinese people, those average Chinese people on the street, they don't think about every day. They don't, they are more concerned about their pocket money, their jobs, all right, their kids, how to educate their kids, whether it is the job creations is possible, and they are those parents. They are more concerned about their kids, whether they are still interested in have a marriage, whether their kids are still interested in have a kids in the future. So this is, I think, that what Chinese people are more concerned. So I think that as long as more American colleagues have, but at the same time, I think you should also invite more Chinese to the United States have talking. So I think that maybe this is the way to alleviate those.
In today's New York Times, there are two articles, two headlines that got my attention. One is a columnist, somebody Michael Walsh's name, said, America's waving the white flag. We're giving in to China. That was one column. The other one is basically, in Davos, the United States has ceded world leadership to China. That's a headline today of a New York Times article. And if you read the article, they're both pretty persuasive. And I think today, most people in this conference would tend to agree that China is a threat, a potential threat or an actual threat, economically, maybe even politically. And putting that aside for a second, let's assume that that's somewhat true. What is the thinking in the Chinese leadership? How to deal with that? Let's assume the Chinese leadership believes that it is in a superior position and going to be more and more in a superior position. Let's make that assumption, just for the sake of discussion here. What will their response be? Will it be to auger in, subjugate the United States, or will the response be, I don't know, we got to work together, maybe live together. I mean, it's real. The hawks will push China to do more, as would be the case in the United States. And just talk to us a little bit about some of the dynamics that are maybe discussion without revealing confidences going on in the Chinese government about that question.
Again, there's no easy answer to that because there are more than 1 billion Chinese people. So there's the official lines response to that. There's those academia colleagues and people, and also there's a general public view. It's quite complex because what you mentioned, those whether it is Washington has raised white flags or the China has been at the upper hand, reminds me of the another story about whether now the China, U.S. are the G2, ever since the APEC meeting last year in Busan in South Korea. The short answer is that I think Beijing, I believe, will be a very ambivalent towards those so-called G2 or status. Neither reject it categorically nor accept it happily. The reason is also quite obvious. I think the long answer to that is, on one side, I think that Beijing, generally speaking, are quite happy about the status. We are at the real equal footing. There's a fundamental shift of perceiving China for a long period of time, of the Washingtons perceiving China from a so-called a rear view mirror to peering China through the side window. So I think that this is quite, sentimentally speaking, I think that many Chinese were quite happy. But at the same time, I think that particularly for the official response to those G2 or to those two superpower, are still, I think that Beijing are still quite cautious about those so-called strategic traps or narrative traps. Particularly, those G2 more refers to those bipolar, while Beijing always, advocated the multipolarity. All right, and the G2 may refer to more about dominance, while Beijing also, stick to the principles of multilateralism.
Right.
So how to deal with those, the rest of the G2? So I think that Beijing is still, wait to see. But obviously, I think that this is the opportunity. The strategic opportunity that Beijing is going to grasp and try to play a more active role to, I would say, to reshape the order, which has been under a serious crisis.
But reshape how? What way? What result?
Number one is to highlight the importance of the United Nations Charter, which Beijing believes that have been already violated repeatedly. So I think that Beijing will stress the importance of the United Nations Charter. Secondly, will double down its efforts of outreaching with those global South countries to push forward a multipolarity. And
at the expense of the United States? At the expense of the United States?
Not at the expense of the United States. The U.S. is always there, but particularly in the past 1 year's Trump administration's policy, and ever since, in the past 1 month, Beijing is extremely concerned about those, Venezuela and Greenland. So you can understand that Beijing need to, rebuild those funding.
This is it's very ironic. When I was serving ambassador, the United States, China, just tentatively suggested maybe some kind of a G2 relationship between China and the U.S., and we rejected it out of hand. That's not something we wanted to do. What about, when I was over there, China was very interested in the top of their list was a bilateral investment treaty, working to find in the negative list, trying to figure out what areas our countries could mutually invest in, then what areas we could not, and that was the negative list. And that, after a while, that just kind of fell off the table. So maybe, I think, should that be resurrected? These are two countries trying to find areas where we can invest. Then there's also a positive list. AI, Gary Reichel talks about mental health, about cancer. Aren't there some ways, it's not just aspirationally, but actually really, finding some cooperation? Is that at all possible?
I think possible. I hope that, if the April summit could still be on the schedule, and the two leaders, President Trump and President Xi, should talk about those, as you said, those bilateral investment treaty initiative.
I have another idea.
And also, particularly, I think that some of specific issues should be on the agenda of cooperation, including, including those working together on those global public health threats, and on those cyber crimes, such as the online fraud or scam. I think that is also very important. So I think that those areas are still, there's a great potential for cooperation. But the challenge here is, maybe this is the West Coast, because I have not been to West Coast for many, many years. When I visited the East Coast, the vibe, the atmosphere is different.
Going to Montana. He'd be very welcome to Montana. with some people, not everybody. Finally, why can't we lock in bilateral summits? Lock it in. Our two presidents meet twice a year. It's locked in. It can't be changed. Forcing us to at least talk to each other. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I like your idea that if there's at least a two or maybe even more summit, that will really inject a very stabilizing the momentum into bilateral relationship. Yeah.
We're supposed to finish.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Yan.
Thank you.
Yeah, the whole day meetings, one of the impressions I got from those panelist discussions the whole day, the half day, that we talk a lot about the competition. The long-term competition between China and the United States is a new normalcy, and particularly in the areas of those transformative technology like AI and supply chain. In that regard, there are a very interesting debates about which country will prevail or win in these areas. At least there are two schools of thoughts in the futures, immediate futures. One believe that China will win because of its because Beijing or China is more good at commercialization as well as its power electricity advantage. But on the other side, say that it is the United States will win because of its a fundamentally more innovative advantage, as well as U.S. it's good at creating a more ecosystems internationally. So, what's your view about that?
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm sitting here really as someone who does those kind of groundwork, and I'm very humbled to be amongst the policy experts. But I guess me sitting here is sort of trying to put a human face to a lot of those topics, right? So like thinking really from the people who has to do the groundwork on a day in and day out basis. So I wanted to say actually like starting from a more sort of human level to see that if you're breathing the air of AI air of Silicon Valley, most of the entrepreneurs, business executives thinking like, when they wake up in the morning, they're not really thinking about like, AI as a sort of, zero-sum geopolitical context. It is more of like, what can this model do for me today to solve real problems? To help me to be more productive and so on and so forth. So it's really like at the more fundamental human sort of level, it's more of a human curiosity and innovation at the best, right? So as you can see that, if we look through this lens, I think on top of or aside of this sort of rivalry, great nation competition kind of narrative, there's also very real sort of interconnectivities in terms of how we explore those kind of innovation. So I think that's very like, Paul mentioned a little bit like, when DeepSeek drops a new model, everybody, well, not everybody, but like a lot of the entrepreneurs that I see in Stanford, they are reading it closely because they have to learn the methods, they have to learn the playbooks. Not so much in the traditional sense of, do I have IP or something like that, but also like in the sense of, this is the deepest human curiosity and innovation and try to be that. So I do think that's kind of the sort of at the policy level, we probably don't see much of that. But I do see like, it's a little hard for me, at least like as a person, to imagine that it will be possible to sort of suppress the sort of, innovation or curiosity or learning from any countries of the AI, letting alone if you think of like, AI for US and AI for China, which is the most superpower. But having said all that, I think there are also like structural differences in the market that, a lot of the panelists has, especially the last one has actually explored, like China has a lot of the engineering power, has a lot of the, a massive amount of data that is collected over the past decades, not just from now, but if you think of when China speak about big data or like, something like facial recognition, that's actually way before this wave of generative AI. So, but all of the data, all of those structures will probably also play an important role. And China has a massive manufacturing capacities. And so that will probably play a role in the future robotic, right? So all of that is different, but the US also has like, foundation models, the best of the, the venture thinking kind of experiment that sort of inspire the deepest of the, again, human curiosity and intelligence, to pursue the, artificial general intelligence, all of that. So it's really, it's always puzzled me to say like, what is winning in AI, right? So we can think of like, what it seems to be forced to me is to say, who have the most powerful, foundation model, and that means winning. That's probably doesn't mean winning. When there are other metrics like, diffusion rates, adoption rates. There are other metrics like, probably, some of were like, export of the AI capability to other countries to really build the ecosystem. So all of that is probably gonna sort of play a role, play in the narrative of who is winning this war. But I guess for me, at least for a short term, I just can't think of a singular way of saying that who is winning. And I suspect, maybe, a lot of the winning or losing scores we're keeping will not dictated by policy desire, or not just dictated by policy desire, but dictated by like, where the technology really goes and where the market goes. So in the short term, I don't know who is winning. And also this is probably not gonna be a meaningful conversation unless we know what is winning means.
Okay, it's quite interesting. Related to this, win or lose questions, it is actually also related to another question about the so-called strategic decoupling between two sides, between two countries on those high technology sectors. But at the same time, even if there are a lot of debates about those strategic decoupling, it is also reported that in the past 1 year, maybe in particular, on U.S. side, there are increasing number of those venture capitalists as well as those banks. They are still following Chinese markets quite closely, or are also invested in those specific local or promising local companies. While at the same time, quite a number of those very rising or promising Chinese local companies are also follow the U.S. markets quite closely and hope that there will be opportunity to invest in U.S. So from a practitioner's perspective, since you are quite familiar with these areas, can you share with us about on the ground, what is the real the mood on the ground of those decoupling or recoupling? Is there any more opportunities for both sides to increase their investment in those areas?
Well, I probably will leave you to sort of be the expert to say like more on the China side, but I do see like I can probably just give some examples, right? So as Patrick mentioned, like there's also in the U.S. there's a huge trend of reindustrialization. So when you think about in reindustrialization, it is actually an area we see some of the collaborations, at least like thinking about it. This is probably not the same as sort of the China's FDI to the US. That's probably going to be different, but I can sort of explain the context so we can sort of think of that in this new era. So in the reindustrialization trends, it's like it's less. Well, there's still there are some of the sort of national champion, or like there are some of the areas where you can see like the big players, big incumbents, they're investing in the U.S. or promise to invest more in the U.S. plant. There are a lot of that, like CHIPS Act, right? But there's also like the trend, as Patrick also mentioned, this is like the venture-backed firms, the startups. They are thinking of reindustrialize the U.S. So they typically like they're coming out of a lab in Berkeley or somewhere else, and then they in some of those less thought about areas, like not chips, but like chemical engineering, some of the green products, as they come out of the labs and they raise probably $30-40 million to build a plant in Minnesota or Montana or somewhere, right? So hopefully they can build a big plant here. So then what's the challenge they have, right? So if you think about how they operationalize this, it's not about money, because they can raise money and they are like money is there from the venture firms. Even like Y Combinator said like we are willing to funding those projects. But what are the challenges they have? They will need, a lot of time they will need inputs, industrial inputs. So you need, be that steel or be that something, some of the basic chemical components, be that, the very foundation, like, screws. So things like that. So they need inputs. A lot of the inputs nowadays are tariff. There are tariffs on it, and higher tariffs on it. Coming from China, one thing, but also even coming from India, that's also very high tariffs on those. They also need equipment. So if you are building a $30 million plant, usually like, just in the rough terms, like, 50 million will probably go to very advanced automated machines. So that's 50 million on the equipment. A lot of them come from China, but also, some other places. And finally, actually, again, like, tied to the previous panel is that, the process engineers, where do you get them? There's a gap. So it's very, very difficult to find a sort of a factory manager who has been in a large-scale chemical plants that operated in the U.S. for the past 10, 15 years. It's just as that. It's just like not. It's not even like you're paying. It's like that knowledge, that know-how has somehow lost. And on the flip side, where they want to source, I mean, a lot of that wants to source it from China. Obviously, they have it. But that comes to the first panel is like, those are trade secrets, right? Those are the IP. So you can't really call them a license, because one big beautiful bill doesn't give you tax credit if you call them as license with a Chinese party. So how do we treat them? So all of those is actually sort of operational challenge, but that's also one example of where you can see people are still thinking about how to sort of build in this sort of difficult period, and trying to find a way to structure those deals. So a lot of U.S. startups, very, very innovative companies, they are still trying to make it work and make products in the U.S., which is make both economic sense, because some products doesn't make economic sense to produce in the U.S., and also like align with the policy incentives. So that's sort of the different of the sort of a Chinese company coming in to build a massive plant narrative.
Yeah, regarding the future trajectory of bilateral economic relationship, there's a catchphrase recently has been used to describe those new model of bilateral economic relationship. It's called a MAD, a mutual assured disruption, that both sides have possess those weapons of mass disruption, and so that also caused a lot of concerns, particularly those business communities that this weaponization of those weapons will further steal the oxygen of economic interdependence. So from a business community's leaders like you, what do you think that it is in a possible way to mitigate those kind of anxiety or tensions?
Sure, I think there are many experts here, so a lot of the people put a lot of thoughts on those kind of things. But I guess what I mean also, we as a law firm do some of that thinking aligned with our clients and partners. But I guess one thing that I at least personally feel is that it is easy to recognize the risk, right? So the risk is there, everybody can see it's on everybody's mind, but it is really hard to action upon those and sort of try to find the right moment to do the right thing. So that's really what has been really challenging for us. I mean, my colleagues, Tim Stratford and Chris and a lot of our colleagues, we do a lot of, scenario planning for clients, right? So, a lot of those exercises not really to say, we don't know. I mean, everybody reading the news will know, but it's really having an honest conversation about, what is the capability, what is the strength lies with us if the worst things happen. So there could be supply chain shock, as you mentioned. It could be sudden increasing tariffs. It could be a lot of other geopolitical events and sort of where we are in those really, worst case scenarios. So I think that's a lot of the purpose, at least how I see it, is really sort of to bring this up. So I do see, I mean, the time is up, so I'll be very quick. So I do think to wrap it up, I do think that we see a lot of the mindset change in terms of business. I mean, especially the U.S. American business, like to sort of quietly building the resilience, right? So it's not just about acting now or today, but also sort of, this is a shift of the mindset that we can have the resilience to withstand those shocks. But I guess it doesn't say that it doesn't mitigate the pains day in day out if you have to do BIS filings. So it's still tremendously difficult to do that in practice, but at least we have a baseline.
Thank you. Maybe I have your last word about in the short term. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the bilateral economic relationship? Many people say that its truth is very fragile between two sides.
I think Jeannette will probably come up and mention that, but I want to say that we as lawyers are built to say whatever happens, we will stand together with our clients, right? So I hope this is the right tagline for the firm.
So neither pessimistic or optimistic, but realistic, all right? Am I right?
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
My time is up.
Yeah. Jeannette, you want to come on? Thank you.
It is right up here.
It is right. So, we ready? Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. So I think at last we have the final session of the day. So I want you to imagine that you have the last word of the world, right? So not any president, not like you, until we meet next year, right? We will meet next year, so we will talk about this next year. But you have the last word. So I wanted to because we have a full day, a lot of interesting panels, a lot of discussion, policy, practice. I wanted us to sort of sit back and sort of take a moment to synthesize what we want to take from this conversation, right? So from all the time we spent together. So what is the sort of the single most important misunderstanding on the U.S. China policy debate that you want everybody to know? So before we meet again next year.
Wow, talk about starting off on a happy note. Meet my new BFF. Yes. So, I have spent most of my professional career, 45 years, nibbling around U.S. China, spent 13 years at our embassy, split between our embassy in Beijing, our consulate in Guangzhou, and all I ever had were questions, and all I ever saw were misunderstandings. So for today, for this moment in time, if I could say anything to anybody, it would be, do not look at the U.S.-China relationship in isolation. I did a presentation several months ago where I had one slide, and that one slide was a map of China, and the caption was, "This is not China." China is the rest of the world, and that needs to be our framing. That is what we misunderstand. We think about our relationship, U.S. v. China, whether we couch that in trade terms, strategic competition, military threat, power projection. What we should be doing is seeking to ask more questions and understand better how China is doing this with all of its other allies, potential partners, adversaries, everywhere they have relationships. That's when we're finally going to understand what is going on.
Right. So we talk about a lot, on the sort of administration versus Congress, right? So it's a perception again, like this is like, administration policies can change, right? They can come around and goes around. The Congress is probably having a longer term view on a lot of things, or maybe not, or they're reactive. So they are like, how do you see the balance of, or rather than sort of the balancing, but sort of the reshaping, the shaping of the policies, like, how do you think of the administration versus Congress? Yeah.
Great question. I would say, especially in the past several years, policy has been more shaped by the executive branch rather than the legislative branch. That said, this is not a zero-sum game. Sometimes they're in alignment, sometimes they're not. But it is not everything is a reaction to an action. And that's important to understand. I also think that you see a lot of action out of Congress that is never intended to result in something that is actionable, that does not become a law. It can just actually be a sentiment of Congress. It can be, some people use the term performative. I don't like that. That sounds frivolous, and it's not frivolous. And senators and representatives are not frivolous people. They're serious people, serious intention. What I would point to, though, and I was watching the ping pong matches last night and thinking, this is very much like the policy debate that goes on in Washington right now. You have, and this is a really good example, right? In how we are wrestling with, what do we do about AI chips? The area that, really I defer to you and your expertise on. Are we selling or are we not selling chips to China? I think that is way too simplistic. And the person that spoke so fluidly and with tremendous depth on this obviously was Paul Triello and the rest of that panel earlier today. But what did you see? What have you seen? You see proposals that look to be in conflict. We need to stop China. No, we need to push global adoption of the full AI technology stack. You see things like the AI export plan, which tries to operationalize that, to use your term, right? Which was then matched last week by, or actually a couple of weeks ago, by the AI Overwatch Act, introduced by Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Representative Mast, Chairman Mast, and that seeks to interject Congress into a review role of reviewing approved export licenses with the ability to actually block them. And that got tweaked even further before it got voted out of committee, right? And all of these things converged. You have the administration changing export license policy literally 24 hours before this same administration issues an initial proclamation, the presidential proclamation, on Section 232 tariffs on certain semiconductors. And what you see there is paving the way for export licenses of certain AI chips to China, and then tariffs as a means of fulfilling revenue sharing agreements on chips coming into the US that are then destined to be re-exported out to China, now matched in AI Overwatch by a last-minute tweak before it got voted out of committee, and that tweak was to say, but you won't sell the Blackwell chip at the very, very highest level. So I think this is a microcosm of that ping pong between the administration and Congress. It's interesting to watch because it's really, really easy to say, oh, this person's a hawk, that person's a duck. And that's just not reality. I think the reality is more complex and in many ways really needs to be driven by some of the things that you've articulated, right? Of needing to figure out what is the most realistic and pragmatic way forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just on the same line, like, you know, you're sitting between the economic policies and national security, right? So we all kind of, you know, with the change mindset, we all kind of get into a time where economic security of a nation is something that is sort of recognized on the both sides. I mean, it used to be that the Chinese recognize more of that. But now I think it's like, it's not just China, it's not just Europe, it's US, but if you look at the European, they are somehow also on the same line, right? So you sit here and what is, again, like based on our tradition of like one single most important thing, what is the one single most important guardrail you think is necessary, but also sort of having like, you know, having the possibility of sort of weakening the entire competitiveness of the US. So what will be your pick?
I would say it's the same guardrail for both, and that would be export controls, not just the regulations themselves, but the policies that underpin it. And by way of context, I've been working on export control issues since serving as the BIS representative in China between 2005 and 2010. So I have about 20 years as, to your point, a day-to-day practitioner of working with companies in this space. And here's why I say it's the same guardrail. We talk about, you know, this economic security. We need to frame that as geo-economic security around the world. And our policies need to reflect that reality, that interconnectedness, as opposed to, at any moment in time, I'm tracking probably anywhere between half a dozen to 15, if not more, proposals, whether they're regulatory or legislative, that deal with some core issue. I don't care if it's semiconductors, AI, critical minerals, data security. These are all different ways of trying to answer the same question using a tool, which is export controls, without ever really articulating the fundamental question that underpins this and knowing what the objective really is about. So how do we get there when we don't have that coherency to begin with? That's when the law of unintended consequences really comes to the fore. And to me, that's the danger. That's why I say the guardrail is the same thing that then poses the threat. So I want to dig a little bit more into this, right? Because, you know, it's easy for me, representing a trade association, to say, hey, you're harming industry, you're harming competitiveness. We represent, the National Foreign Trade Council represents close to 200 US headquartered and domiciled companies that believe, number one, in fair, open, rules-based global trade as a force for good, and believes fervently that national security is always going to be first and foremost. How you get there and whether or not export controls is quote unquote the right way to do it or the most effective way is what results in a lot of these conversations about those guardrails, right? And so it's never been more important to get it right. It's never been more difficult because for export controls, the devil is always in the details. I spent a tremendous amount of time explaining to policymakers And I don't care whether they're on the Hill or in the agencies at any level, here's why you don't mix the ITAR and the EAR. I say that what I do is I play and ask questions about the alphabet soup of national security regulatory compliance. That's not really a flippant answer, that's the truth. Because it's when you understand those nuances that you can say, here's why you cannot have something that is aspirational. For me, as a practitioner, I need to see a through line from a policy objective to what a company does in their ERP system to not only comply, but to achieve the underlying objective, whether that's security or competitiveness, or both.
Great. So I guess we are really coming to almost the end of the end. So I will say nowadays my workflow is that I will open my ChatGPT and say, look, if I want to learn something, I will say, act as XYZ expert, right? So I'm gonna prompt my ChatGPT today to say, act like Jeannette. Like what will be the single most important indicators that you would want us to watch for the next year, right? So not a headline, not a crisis, not something that we sort of get today and then probably something tomorrow, but so the single most important indicator that you watch for 2026. Again, until we meet next year, so I hope you can have a better answer than ChatGPT, right? So
I don't know about better, okay. But I'm going to answer that question in the reverse.
Right.
And so first let me tell you what I'm not watching. Mm-hmm. It's probably what I get asked the most questions on, which is how long do you think the trade truce, the tenuous agreement that was reached between Presidents Trump and President Xi in Busan will last? I think that's a little bit irrelevant, if you will, right? That's not what's going to matter, and that's not what I'm watching, because something that's not on paper doesn't matter. And it started eroding almost right away. All the mechanisms are in place to slowly erode or just walk away from. I don't think we'll see a cataclysmic blow up. So what am I watching? I am watching what is going on domestically in both countries, on both sides of the Pacific. This is the one place where I'm going to contradict my answer to your first question, Yan, where I said we need to look very expansively around the globe. And here I take a more insular approach, and I'm watching very closely what China is doing. Are they able to address some of their domestic economic challenges of moving from this investment economy to a more of a consumptive economy? Are they able to move into services away from they've kind of reached the peak of the manufacturing ladder. Fun fact, the very first dark factory, I didn't even know that word existed, that I ever walked into was at Huawei in Shenzhen, circa 2007. That should terrify people, that is how long China has had in terms of a lead time on advanced manufacturing, on what we now, almost 20 years later, are thinking of as being state-of-the-art manufacturing, right? In the U.S., obviously, I'm looking at our increasing polarization. I'm looking at not so much midterm elections, but just what is the national dialogue on both sides of the Pacific? And I think when we track that, we'll have a much stronger understanding of what is going on bilaterally as well as globally. It's been an amazing day. I know we're close to the end here. I've been asked to sort of try to summarize this incredible panel. Dr. Chen, Ambassador Baucus, you guys are just all amazing. I don't know that there's a single phrase or catchword other than just this driving need to remain open and to remain curious. And I'm going to call you out on this, my friend. At heart, you're an optimist, because you have said over and over, we will meet again next year. And so I'm going to close our session with that hope for all of us.
That is not me, that is ChatGPT. Thank you.
as we close, I agree with Jeanette's common thread that we heard today about the need to rephrase across policy, security as it relates to technology, innovation, Chinese-American diaspora, and even how we look at a map. And I also would like to go back to Tim Stratford's earlier comments about staying humble. We certainly started to do that last night when we were playing ping pong with the China consulate, but I think that is the feeling, and that's the right way to go forward. So thank you again, everybody, for being here today. All of our speakers, everyone in our audience, everyone online, our sponsors, our team, including our volunteers and our interns. If you are joining our 2 roundtable sessions, these are private off-the-record discussions, please check the back of your name tag. We're gonna have a screen here showing the back of your name tag. We've taken great care to highlight the sessions that you're in and which floor you're on and which room you're in. So if you have signed up for those previously, please head over there. These are private off-the-record sessions. They're gonna start at 2:45. If you are a moderator of roundtables A and B, please head over right now. That's Ambassador Marcial and Andy Rothman. If you are joining our sponsorship dinner and you have luggage down on the ground floor, we are closing coat check on the ground floor. Bring your bags up to the 9th floor so we can make sure that you leave with your luggage intact after the sponsorship dinner. We have many programs in Northern California and in Seattle. On Monday, Chen Dongxiao is coming with us to Seattle, so we're going to do a private event with him there. So if you want to join us, please do. We have a media art symposium. We're bringing all the big names to Napa and to San Francisco, February 19th and 20th. It's looking at the future of time-based media, the intersection of art and tech. So come back and spend time with us, and we have our big gala on April 23rd. Thank you to those who joined us online. We appreciate you supporting our mission. This concludes the public portion of our program. We have networking until 2:45, and then the roundtables start. Thank you again.